Let me describe someone you probably know. They're stuck in a job they hate. They've been there for years. They complain about it constantly. Everyone around them knows they should leave. Their friends know it. Their family knows it. A stranger could figure it out in one conversation. The solution is obvious. Update the resume, start applying, interview somewhere better. But they don't do it. Years pass. Nothing changes. Or maybe it's the relationship. Everyone can see it's not working. She treats him like shit in front of his friends. He's miserable. The answer is obvious. End it and move on. But he doesn't. More years pass. Or maybe it's the drinking. It's destroying his life, his health, his relationships, his career. The solution is literally free. Just stop drinking. But he doesn't. Another decade gone. Or maybe it's fitness. He's out of shape, feels like shit, knows exactly what to do. Eat less, move more. YouTube has endless free information. The entire roadmap is available. But he doesn't do it. Year after year, nothing changes. Here's what's interesting. These aren't complicated problems. There's no mystery about what needs to happen. The person knows. Everyone around them knows. The information is free and abundant. So why don't they act? The standard explanations don't hold up. They don't know what to do. No, they absolutely know. They're lazy. No, many of them are working incredibly hard at other things. They lack discipline. No, discipline isn't the issue. Something else is blocking action, and if we're being honest, you probably already know what it is. Here's something I've noticed. We have an entire vocabulary designed to avoid saying the word fear. Individuals do it. Instead of saying, I'm afraid, we say, I'm stressed. Instead of, I'm scared to act, we say, I'm overwhelmed. Instead of, I'm terrified of rejection, we say, the timing isn't right. Cultures do it. We talk about building confidence instead of reducing fear. We say, be resilient instead of face what scares you. We celebrate courage but rarely acknowledge the fear that courage is responding to. And entire industries do it. The self-help world has created an entire language of euphemisms. Anxiety management instead of fear reduction. Limiting beliefs instead of afraid of specific outcomes. Lack of discipline instead of too scared to start. Low self-confidence instead of afraid of being judged. Even the solutions people seek, therapy, coaching, personal development, often talk around fear instead of directly at it. Why does this matter? Because if you can't name the problem correctly, you can't solve it correctly. If the problem is fear, say fear. If the solution is fear reduction, say that. Here's where it gets interesting. Most people say, I'm anxious because my life sucks. The bad job makes me anxious. The failed relationship makes me anxious. The lack of money makes me anxious. In other words, they say that the situation causes the anxiety. So the logical solution is, fix the situation, then the anxiety will go away. But here's the problem. You can't fix the situation if your fear is preventing the actions that would fix it. The reality is the exact opposite. They should be saying, my life sucks because I'm anxious. You're not anxious because you're in a bad job. You're in a bad job because anxiety prevents you from updating your resume, applying elsewhere, and interviewing. The fear of rejection, of the unknown, of maybe failing, keeps you locked in place. You're not anxious because you're out of shape. You're out of shape because fear keeps you from going to the gym. Fear of being judged, of looking weak, of being the fat guy struggling with the weights. You're not anxious because you're in a bad relationship. You're in a bad relationship because fear prevents you from leaving. Fear of being alone, of not finding anyone else. of confronting the uncomfortable truth. Here's proof that the causality runs backward. When people do the work that reduces their baseline fear, through therapy, medication, genuine exposure work, whatever, suddenly, they take all those actions they've been thinking about for years. They become unlocked and start moving forward. The situation hadn't changed yet. The knowledge hadn't changed. The discipline hadn't changed. What changed was the fear level, and lowering it made the movement become possible. So how exactly does fear create a stuck life? Let's get specific. When you're afraid, your brain does something very particular. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles planning, reasoning, long-term thinking, complex decision-making, gets suppressed. Blood flow and resources get redirected to survival structures. Your amygdala, your brainstem, the parts that handle immediate threat response. This made perfect sense when we were being chased by predators. You don't need to contemplate philosophy when a lion is charging you. You need to run. But here's the problem. Your nervous system can't tell the difference between a lion and a job interview. It can't distinguish between actual physical danger and the possibility of social rejection. So when you're chronically afraid, when your baseline anxiety is high, you're constantly running on your survival brain instead of your thinking brain. And your survival brain only knows 4 responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Let me show you how each of these creates a stuck life. Freeze. You don't take action to improve your situation. You know what you should do, but you can't seem to do it. Years pass. Nothing changes. This isn't laziness. This is a threat response. When animals are overwhelmed by a predator they can't fight or flee from, they freeze. You're doing the same thing, except the predator is the possibility of failure, rejection, or judgment. Fawn. You accept mistreatment to avoid conflict. You say yes when you mean no. You tolerate bad behavior from partners, bosses, friends. You can't set boundaries because you're terrified of the confrontation, of people being upset with you, of being rejected or abandoned. Flight. You quit things when they get hard. You start the business but abandon it at the first obstacle. You begin the fitness program but stop when it gets uncomfortable. You enter relationships but leave at the first sign of real intimacy or conflict. Fight. You lash out at people who expose uncomfortable truths. Someone gives you feedback and you get defensive. Someone suggests you should change something and you attack them. You sabotage relationships with anger because you're terrified of vulnerability, of being wrong, of people seeing your weaknesses. Here's what's devastating about this. These aren't character flaws. These are survival responses. They're what your nervous system does when it perceives threat. But when you're chronically afraid, when your baseline anxiety is high, you're stuck in these patterns constantly. Before we go further, let's address something important. If you recognize yourself in any of this, it's not because you're weak or broken. There are real reasons your nervous system might be running this hot. Maybe you're genetically predisposed to higher anxiety. Some people's nervous systems are just tuned more sensitive. In ancestral environments, you'd be the one who heard the predator first, who noticed the threat before anyone else. That's a survival advantage. In modern life, it just means you can't relax at parties. Maybe you developed these fear responses as a child and never consciously unlearned them as an adult. Your brain encoded, "The world is dangerous," when you were 7, and nobody ever taught you how to update that programming. Maybe you experienced something traumatic that encoded a threat response your nervous system never released. Here's what matters. It doesn't matter which of these explanations applies to you. What matters is recognizing that high baseline fear isn't a character flaw. It's a nervous system state. And nervous system states can be changed. So how do you know if this actually applies to you? Many people with high baseline anxiety think, this is just how everyone feels. They've been anxious for so long, they don't know what calm feels like. They think the way they experience the world is normal. But there's a clinical assessment called the GAD-7, Generalized Anxiety Disorder Scale. It's what doctors use to measure anxiety levels. 7 simple questions about the last 2 weeks. Things like, how often have you felt nervous, anxious, or on edge? How often have you had trouble relaxing? How often have you felt afraid, as if something awful might happen? You can find it free online. Takes 2 minutes. You score yourself on each question. If you score above 10, you're not imagining it. You don't just get stressed sometimes like everyone else. You have clinically significant anxiety. In other words, for whatever reason, your nervous system is running too hot. And here's what's important about that. It's not a life sentence. It's a diagnosis. And diagnoses point toward solutions. The GAD-7 can show you, no, this is not normal. This is a real thing, and it can be addressed. So let's bring this all together. All your problems are really fear. And here's why this reframe matters. Once you name the actual problem, you can pursue the actual solution. The actual work is not building better habits. It's not managing your time better. It's not reading more self-help books or listening to more podcasts or finding the right productivity system. The actual work is reducing your fear. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do that. That's not the point of this video. Different things work for different people. Therapy, medication, actual systematic exposure work. Whatever reduces your baseline fear enough that you can take action. But you have to name it first. Once you name it correctly, the path forward becomes clear. Not easy, but clear. Because here's the truth. You already know what you need to do to improve your life. You've known for years. Everyone around you knows. The only question is whether you're going to reduce your fear enough to actually do it. That's the choice. Name the fear. Reduce the fear. Take the action you've been avoiding. That's it. That's the actual work. Everything else is just noise.